thanks very much for joining in. My name is Amita Vadva. My colleague Richa is also joining us, and we are also expecting Deepthi to be with us as we get you the exhausted coverage when it comes to Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States. He took off today from the Palam Technical Airport, and thereafter he will also be addressing the first Quad in-person meeting with the countries, the leaders of the countries of Australia, Japan and also the United States. Even is the Prime Minister who is also scheduled to address the UNGA at New York, and this will mark his Prime Minister's first foreign tour in 6 months and also be the first time as he is visiting the country after President Joe Biden has assumed office. Richa.
In fact, the Prime Minister in a statement has now said that he has been invited by US President Joe Biden, and during his visit the Prime Minister will review the India-US comprehensive global strategic partnership with Joe Biden as well. We'll take a look at some reports filed by our senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor from Washington.
And before we do that, Richa, I'm told that Deepthi is also joining us at this point, because Deepthi, as we continue to get the live updates from the Prime Minister's visit to the United States of America, we are looking at high-level engagements that is now lined up as the Prime Minister embarks on his visit.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, Amita and Richa, I think the next 3-4 days extremely important, not just from the point of view of India, but I think also because of a lot of reset that you're looking at the global perspective. You know, whether that is the so-called Western Bloc, whether what has happened vis-a-vis the Taliban, approaches towards Pakistan, and the elephant in the room, you know, is China. It is China that already has expressed its so-called displeasure over the Quad meetings. But, you know, the next few days, as I said, extremely important. I think we'll be also cutting across to our colleague Abhishek Kapoor, who's reporting live for us, and he should be up with us any moment now. But let's also talk about why this visit of the Prime Minister to the U.S. is so very important. Because remember, he's not just visiting the U.S. for the UNGA, that is the United Nations General Assembly, where he's going to be putting out his address. And, you know, I think we hear it very, very clearly from MEA, Amita and Richa, that we will be talking about radicalism. We will be talking about extremism. Terrorism goes without, you know, I think a mention. Terrorism is something that India has suffered for the longest time. India has spoken against terrorism, again, vociferously at number of occasions. If you remember what the Prime Minister also, Amit and Richa, said at the SCO, I think we got a larger idea about what the UNGA address will also look like. He spoke about the Taliban government. He said this government is not inclusive. He gave a very clear warning to all those who are in a hurry right now to recognize and legitimize the Taliban. So I think that way, Amita, this address is going to be extremely important. This is about the UNGA. Then there is the Quad meeting. Now, Quad meeting, again, many say is going to be the real push here in the direction to get a new balance, you know, especially in the Indo-Pacific area, Richa and Amita. You know, as our viewers know, there are a lot of, you know, acronyms for treaties, for combinations that you actually see in the Indo-Pacific area. But Quad is, again, very important, where you will have India, you will have the US, you will also have Japan and Australia talking about this. And Amita, you know, the last point before I toss it back to you and Richa is also about that bilateral, you know, because the Prime Minister could have just spoken at the UNGA and be back home, but there is a bilateral. He is having that bilateral with Joe Biden. America right now is in a very tough position. The world is watching America right now, Amita and Richa, because you've heard Anthony Blinken saying very, very clearly, we are willing to relook at our relationship with Pakistan. So will that happen? India is watching that. India will find out whether there is action against Pakistan or not. And I think China, as I said, is the elephant in the room that is going to be discussed, Amita and Richa, and spoken about.
Absolutely, because there are a range of high-profile engagements that are now lined up, and the second such foreign visit since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. Even as the senior executive editor Abhishek Kapoor is reporting for us from Washington, D.C., he had sent across a few reports as well. This time around, what will be the expectations from Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi as he visits the United States of America?
Well, as I see it, there are two very important aspects to this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States. One is the issue of terrorism. The other is the issue of expansionism. Why I say that? A, because after the exit of the United States from Afghanistan, the region has become unstable it's potentially a hotbed for terror organizations to use the soil from Afghanistan and spread terror in its neighborhood and beyond. So that's something which has to be discussed in the context of the manner in which Pakistan, for example, continues to back a Taliban regime which has not been recognized by anyone and acts as a conduit between China and Taliban, creating a nexus which is an area of concern for not just India, for other nations as well. The second aspect of expansionism, of course, the manner in which China has behaved rather recklessly for some time now, the manner in which they behaved with us vis-a-vis Ladakh, the manner in which they have behaved with Australia and really rode roughshod in their bilateral relationship, and the manner in which they have conducted themselves vis-a-vis Philippines, Indonesia, and Japan. All that is something which is an area of concern for all these world leaders, and that's why Quad gains importance. Prime Minister has given an outline of what he thinks of Indo-Pacific and Quad in his Shangri-La dialogue address in 2018, and perhaps he'll take it forward from there in terms of open seas, rule-based order, and how every nation should be behaving, particularly in Southeast Asia and the extended Indo-Pacific. So Quad between India, United States, Australia and Japan becomes important for that, and Prime Minister, of course, would be making his contributions and sharing his thoughts on both terrorism and expansionism, be it here in Washington, D.C. during his bilaterals and the Quad, or at the UNGA when he makes that very important address. There are two immediate contexts to Prime Minister's visit to Washington, D.C. and to New York. First is, of course, America's exit from Afghanistan and the emerging situation there, where we believe that there is all likelihood that Afghan soil can become a hotbed of spreading terror, not just in the region, but around the world. So that's an area of concern on which India and Prime Minister Modi have to discuss with all the leaders who would be coming here, not just at the UNGA, but for example in Washington, D.C. for the Quad Summit, for the COVID Summit. And then there is the other context of the expansionism that we have seen by the Chinese establishment over the last 2 years, not just with India and Ladakh, for example, but then in the South China Sea with Philippines, with Indonesia, with Malaysia, the manner in which they have behaved with the Australians, the manner in which they have behaved with the Japanese. That's something which has to be discussed, and that is the core issue that would be there on the table at the Quad Summit when Prime Minister of India, Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister of Japan, and then of course President Biden, they sit together to discuss how to engage and tackle Chinese belligerence, how to engage and tackle China's aggression all around. So these are the two contexts in which Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit is going to occupy the center stage for the next couple of days. Even as Indian concerns on Afghanistan are going to be a very important part of Prime Minister's agenda as he travels to Washington, D.C. and New York. What is important is that Pakistan already stands isolated in the Committee of Nations. An example of which came today when SAARC decided that the foreign ministers meeting on the sidelines of UNGA is not going to happen because Pakistan was insisting that Taliban be given a place on the table in lieu of the earlier Kabul regime. Now look at the irony that Pakistan itself is yet to recognize Taliban government in Kabul, and yet it is pushing Taliban in ways like this when it was insisting that Afghanistan's seat be given to Taliban regime. So that's how I think the agenda would go. Perhaps Prime Minister would take it forward from here in terms of making sure that Pakistan stands exposed and isolated even more when it comes to Afghanistan, when it comes to terror, and when it comes to, in general, spreading instability in the region and the world. Okay, so we are here at the US Capitol, and we met somebody who got interested in knowing that Prime Minister of India is traveling to the United States. He's an attorney from Kentucky, right?
Kentucky, that's right.
Kentucky. And can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jay Matheny. I'm an attorney. I practice law in Paducah, Kentucky. We are here from Paducah, Kentucky with a delegation, a group called the Paducah Area Chamber of Commerce.
Right.
We are here to meet with our elected officials about funding for various projects in Western Kentucky.
All right. So Prime Minister Narendra Modi from India is traveling to the United States, to Washington, D.C. He's going to have a bilateral with President Biden, and they're going to discuss China during Quad Summit. So you have some views on that?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, it's always exciting when we have a foreign head of state in the United States. We're always glad to have our friends and visitors from around the world here. So I think the China issue is kind of interesting for folks from India, and I would say that because, you know, India and China are practically neighbors, you know, but I think the United States and India have quite a few interests that are similar in nature, you know, both English-speaking democracies, exactly. And so I think relations between India and China are probably a lot like relations between India and the United States. You know, we have a relationship. Obviously, we have a significant amount of trade with China, as does India, I'm sure. But, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing. We're walking a line. We're sort of tiptoeing around some issues because China has, we actually, you know, we have to say this. We have some concerns about China and foreign relations. And not only that, but also China's record on human rights. And so when it comes to China, we have a relationship with China. We have to continue that relationship, but we also have to be mindful of the fact that, you know, we've got some issues with China.
Like what they're doing in the Indo-Pacific with the open seas?
Exactly. And China's record on Hong Kong has kind of been controversial, as with China's relationship with Taiwan over the course of time. So
also, you think the manner in which the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, is that something which is discussed here as something which could have been done differently?
Well, I think, you know, certainly today we didn't talk about that as a delegation a whole lot, but I would say this. I think everyone would agree, and certainly I think a lot of Americans would agree, that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was kind of a tricky situation. I mean, certainly I don't know that we had all of our ducks in a row, so to speak, before we had that withdrawal from Afghanistan. But, you know, again, I think that at the end of the day, you know, we have to be mindful of the fact that as Americans, we have to, I don't think we could stay there forever. You know, I think that when we had to withdraw...
It could have been done differently?
I think it could have been done a little bit differently. We could have done a little more strategic planning before we withdrew from Afghanistan. Now, I'm no military expert, so I don't know exactly what that would have entailed, but I think certainly there were security concerns, especially for people left behind, especially for Americans left behind, and our allies who were left behind in Afghanistan as well.